All right. Wonderful. Holly Martin,
Mm.
welcome to the show, aka Wind Hippy, coming to us all the way from Australia. How are you doing?
Good. I'm really good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm a little jealous of your position in the world right now, for sure. Where exactly are you in Australia?
I'm in Port Douglas, up a river, like up a mangrove river. There's bats and kookaburras and crocodiles. It's really beautiful up here.
Oh, holy cow. Oh, so you're pretty far north. Like you're I for some reason I thought you were further down towards maybe like Coffs Harbor or Sydney even. You're way up there.
Yeah, just trying to make some tracks to get to Indonesia. I'm hoping to get to Darwin within the next month and then pop out to Indo end of June. So trying to make some
Oh,
moves.
holy smokes. Wow. I've read plenty of books about that part of the circumnavigation going through like the Torres Strait and
Yeah.
then going, all the there's a lot of stuff going on there. I mean, I guess first and foremost, I got to tip my hat to you. Like you are an amazing adventurer. Like that route that you're taking, people a lot of times will compare it to the trip that I did through the Southern Ocean and they're like, "Oh, that's the easy route." But they're dead wrong. I mean, you have so much more navigation, you have so many more components to a trip like that it really does take quite a bit of skill. So you've definitely it's very impressive watching some of the videos and seeing what you've been doing over the last couple of years. It's crazy.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been fun, but I agree. I think ocean passages are often a lot easier than coastal sailing because you just kind of there's nothing to hit. You just have to pay attention to the weather. And then coastal sailing, it's like reefs and ships and land and the winds are funky and yeah, a whole lot of everything.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. Well, and I guess before we get into sort of where you are now, um, I like to try and connect the dots a little bit. But you started everything off back in Maine, and that was
Yeah.
where I actually outfitted Sparrow to do the circumnavigation
Oh,
up in a
cool.
little boatyard in Rockland, Maine. Whereabouts did you do your refit?
Nice. I did my refit well, near Round Pond, Maine, in a town called Bremen.
Ooh,
But it's
I don't know
about
where
40
that
minutes.
is.
No one does. It's about 40 minutes south of Rockland. It's just on the next peninsula over. So pretty close to where you did yours.
Oh, okay. So just south of like Thomaston and like Tennant's Harbor and all that area.
Yeah, you kind of just go down the coast and then out the next peninsula. And it's on the same. I don't know if you know Damerscotta. That's kind of the bigger town in the area, but it's not.
I've yeah, I've heard of that. Oh, okay. And you were
Yeah.
there. You wintered over in that boat while you were fixing it up.
I was not living on the boat. My parents live in a solar house in the middle of the woods, and my dad has a business building custom furniture and custom boat interiors, and he has a big barn on the road. And because, well, in Maine there aren't that many boat yards, so a lot of people put their boats on
Right.
trucks, and then the truck just takes it wherever. So I had my boat trucked and parked right next to his shop where he does everything to boats. And so I had access to all of his tools, was like plugged into the side of the barn. And then I lived at my parents' house and I'd just walk down the driveway and work on the boat. Thank God I wasn't living on it. It was so cold that winter. It was snowy. Like I had a little tunnel that went up, like snow up to my waist that I would walk through to get to the ladder. I remember sitting in the cockpit and just looking at the snow-covered trees, and I was like, one day this will be palm trees, and I'll be somewhere really beautiful and warm. I have to keep that vision, otherwise I would have gone crazy.
Yeah, I definitely know that. I left on a few of my voyages from Rockland, and the last one I wasn't able to leave until about mid-November, and I literally had
Ooh.
to chip icicles off the mainsail before I took off. Like it was so cold,
That's
and
fun.
all I did was dream of like, oh, I'm gonna get past the Gulf Stream, and it's gonna be warm and pleasant, and I can't wait. And yeah, so you got
Yeah,
to project yourself, to
you
that
do.
destination sometimes.
I think you have to be a dreamer to be a sailor and a cruiser because there's a lot of times when what you're doing in the moment is kind of horrible and you have to know that you're doing it for a reason and you have to be able to dream about the goal of the palm trees or whatever the next country.
Well, and it's funny you say that because that was one of the things that I really like about watching your YouTube videos, especially, is that there's the sailing aspect and living aboard and all that sort of stuff. But it seems like every time you always add a little bit of, I don't know, whether it's like the mental health of being out there by yourself and little things that you do, and I don't know, there's like these little tidbits, these little diamonds of good solid information that I obviously can relate to really well because I've gone
Mhm.
through that sort of stuff. But I mean, for people that you're sort of inspiring, I think to set off and go after their dreams, like it's not common to find that in the YouTube sailing genre, and I think you do a really good job with that.
Oh, thanks.
You're
Yeah, I
welcome.
think
I
that
mean, is is it purposeful? Is it something you like to throw into every video, or is it just that's just how you are when you're offshore and you like to just talk?
yeah, I mean, solo sailing, the camera is my friend. So I think the conversations that I would normally have with a friend, I just put the GoPro on and start talking. And whatever comes out is what comes out. I'm not trying to curate, I'm just trying to share. I think, being alone at sea, you have a lot of those sorts of thoughts. And it is a big mental exercise to keep yourself happy and sane. And it kind of is cathartic to talk about it, even if I'm just talking into a camera. And then when I'm editing, sometimes like I'm like, oh, that's so personal. I don't know if I want to share it. And sometimes if it's like sometimes I do edit it out if I just it's too tender to share with the world. But I've been in the last year, I've just had some positive feedback when I share those more tender moments. And so I'm trying to put them in a bit more. And I mean, it's really just about, I read the comments and they're all like 98% of them are just so nice. And when I share stuff like that, people respond in such a good, positive way that then it makes me want to share more. Because I guess if you put, when I put out videos and I'm like, oh, whatever, I don't really care. Like I stand by what I said here. If I get negativity about it, it doesn't matter as much. Whereas if I put out something personal, then it's a little bit more, I don't know, delicate. So it's been like a learning process to realize that it is a safe space, I feel, on my YouTube channel to share those thoughts and feelings.
Well, and I think it brings you, I don't know, it I don't want to say it just makes you more relatable, but it does in a lot of ways because
Mm,
everybody's got these sort of fears and these issues and things that they're trying to sort of deal with. And when we can open up as people who are putting out this content, because not so much on YouTube, but definitely with the podcast over the last maybe year or so, I've tried to do that as well, because in the
mm,
beginning it was more cut and dry, and I wanted to share my experiences and just sit down with people and chat. And I do a lot of solo shows where
mm,
I've talked for an hour or whatever, and I really started to, I guess, divulge more information about how I'm feeling and the struggles that I'm going through and stuff. And like you said, I mean, the feedback was pretty amazing, and
yeah,
I was afraid of doing that. I was like, ooh,
yeah,
I don't want to throw too much out there into the world of the internet. I mean, it can be scary, but I
yeah,
also don't really ever read comments or anything like that. Like I get emails from the show, and those
mhm,
obviously I read, but yeah, I stopped looking at comments and reviews and all that years ago. I just couldn't handle it.
cool. I'll read every comment.
I can't get over the fact that I can't control my head enough so that I can read 10 good comments that are awesome and great feedback, and then there's
Mhm,
one real crummy one, and that's the one that sticks with me, and it made it so it would like physically sort of upset me, and I was
yeah,
like, I don't have the mental capacity to block that out, so I just can't. I have to like basically shelf all of them, which is unfortunate,
mhm.
but it is what it is, I guess.
I think a lot of people have that strategy though, to just decide that, I'm doing this for me. And if there's negativity, I just don't need it. So I'm just not going to accept it into my life. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do remember some of the nasty comments. There haven't been many, but when I first started putting out videos, there was this one guy who just came in and commented on my weight in about 3 videos in a row. And I was like, what? this
Ugh.
doesn't make any sense at all. And it was, yeah, but I think I'm lucky. I barely have any negative comments to deal with. I think um, if I had more, I probably would stop reading them too. But I still remember that, and it was like 3 years ago. So yeah, I guess they do get in there. But
Yeah.
it's more of a, you just, I don't know, compartmentalize. You know, there's always people who are going to throw negativity at you, and it's not really about me as much as it is about them, right? They're just trying to make themselves feel better. And I can almost feel bad for them because to be in such a bad place that you have to post mean things about people online, like
Yeah.
clearly don't have anything better to do with your life. So
Well, and yeah, I mean, I've always found that when you run into people who are really angry or upset or just being jerks, in real life, essentially, that typically means that they're having to deal with something, or they're going through something
yeah,
that, it's affecting it. And I always try and kind of keep that in the back of my mind to be like, well, you know what, maybe let's just let that slide, because who knows what that person's actually going through. And there have been
yeah,
times where I've run into people who are so upset and they're being so rude and so mean that I will literally stop and be like, are you okay? Because
yeah,
this shouldn't make you this mad. Like, what's going
right.
on? So I don't know. It is kind of funny, but wow, I don't know. I remember a couple of, like, I think they were just like YouTube shorts that I had put out
Mhm.
over this last summer, where things started to ramp up a little bit. And there was one that, I don't know, kind of went viral, a couple 100,000 views and all that sort of stuff, but the comment section exploded, and it was just a total dumpster fire of people
Oh,
back and forth fighting. They got into like politics. It was a short about how calm it was out on the ocean. And I don't know. After that,
yes,
I was
very
kind of like,
political actually. Yeah.
I always steer clear of all that sort of stuff. I figure the podcast and stuff is a great way to take a break from all that for anybody that doesn't want it. Because I mean, the volume of just content on politics on online and is just it's staggering how much there is out
Yeah.
there. And if I can give you a little breathing room from that, I always feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also from traveling, I've noticed that Americans love their politics and other countries not so much, or they just, it's not part of the general conversation. Like I've met a couple people now, and I was in Townsville for a couple months in Australia, and I spent a lot of time with two different local families, and maybe could guess their politics based on other conversations, but we never talked about politics. And it wasn't that we were avoiding it, it was just that it's not a conversation here. So I don't even know what they are. And then I feel like in the States, we're so into it, which I think it's great to talk about it too, but it definitely then creeps into every aspect of your life. I don't know which is better and which is worse. They're just two different ways of doing it.
Yeah, it's I kind of almost feel like in the States, in the last bunch of decades, or the last bunch of years, I suppose, it's really turned into almost like a sport, where
Yeah.
you've got one team and another team, and everybody's just going at it to, I don't know. In the end, we all have to compromise anyway, so who knows? But anyway, switching gears on that, I did want to mention, I see how that stuff just grabs hold of you, and it can drive a whole conversation.
I know. Let's talk about politics. Who are you voting for?
Yeah, right. Oh god. No, it was actually pretty funny because I was watching the latest video of you getting to Australia. So you were
Mhm.
sailing from, where were you sailing from, and where were you sailing to?
Yeah, I was sailing from Gizo in the Solomon Islands towards Townsville, Australia.
Okay, and that's
Yeah.
that's got to be 1,000 miles or so, 1,200,
I think yeah, 1200 I think it was ish.
and it was pretty much wind, pretty much not on the nose, but you were close reaching pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be all on the beam, but I guess there's a bit of a current pushing the nose off, so I had to have a slightly different angle. So, yeah, I could just make the tack angle. I probably could have come up a hair more if I had to, but mostly close hauled, which when I was planning it, I was like, oh, 30, 35 knots on the beam isn't so terrible, but then I was like, oh, close hauled the whole way. Cool. All right.
Oh my gosh. Well, it was I'm sitting there watching it and I'm thinking to myself like, "Oh, boy, this video kind of makes me want to get back out on the ocean and
Mhm.
oh, there's some parts of it." And then I'm looking at it and I'm like, I know that feeling of like
Yeah.
beating into the wind and waves day after day without any end in sight, and just how like because you were just sort of like, well, today I'm just gonna be down in the cabin, I'm gonna pretty
Mhm.
much lay here and hang out. And
Mhm.
I remember doing that, and I just think to myself, man, that's why I don't want to go back out on the ocean.
Yeah, I think that's probably not the best video to watch to be like, "Yeah, sailing."
But yeah, I think you even talk about it in there where once you get through that, and if you
Mhm.
can see the sort of the palm trees, so to speak, at the end of that sort of miserable experience, it's well worth it. And I've always been a big proponent that struggle is really, really the key to find really amplified joy. Because
Yeah.
if you don't have that crummy part, the good stuff doesn't really feel quite as good. But man, when you punish yourself for how long did that passage take?
Oh gosh, I was it 9 days or 10 days, or I don't even remember. 9? 10?
I think it was somewhere around there because your boat, so your double ender, it's 27 feet. I can't remember the
Mhm.
name, what type it is, but it's kind of similar in some aspects to a west sail as far as how it'll do into the wind and how fast it'll go. Because my Mighty Sparrow's maybe a 5.5 knot boat if I'm kind of pushing it.
Mhm. Yeah.
How about yours?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. She goes slowest close hauled. That's her least favorite point of sail because I have a
Yeah.
10.2-foot beam, only 27-foot length. So going into the wind is not the best point of sail. I don't point very well and I don't go very fast. If I'm making 100-mile days, I'm really happy if I'm close hauled.
Oh, nice. Okay. Do you hobby horse when the you're going straight into the chop? Because I definitely do. Like Sparrow, I have to peel away to about 60 or 70 degrees off the wind to prevent that from happening.
Oh wow. No, my boat does really well. I mean, it does really well close hauled. It's got a very plumb bow, so it's like super roundy and it kind of just bounces and skims. And then because it's so beamy, if I have a rail in the water, it means I'm overpowered. And that's how I know when I'm down below, I can hear the waves washing over the deck, and then I know it's time to change the head sail or put in a reef. She sails beautifully, but yeah, it's definitely very. I do more of the like, when your boat just smacks into a wave and the whole rig shudders. I do a lot more of
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Because the West Sail's got a really rounded bow, but it's like sometimes if I'm trying to go into either head seas or just some pretty steep chop, I mean it's rearing up like a stallion, just like woo, and comes up and drops down, and I'll slow down to 2.5 knots or something like that, and that's all I can do unless I crack way off to, like I said, like 70 degrees or so. And so, I mean,
Uh,
I've always said that a West Sail is essentially allergic to going upwind. You just want to go with it as much as humanly possible.
that's really funny. My
But
boat
there
does
was,
that if I'm trying to motor into chop. Then it's almost
mm,
impossible. But sailing, it's either that or I'm in denial. Like, no, it's fine.
there was one little trip that I had to go into a little town called Oriental over by
Oh,
like Beaufort and stuff. You've
yeah.
probably been
I
there.
left my
Yeah.
boat there for months.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So I came in, I was coming up from the south and I was going to stay at the Oriental Hotel Marina or whatever it is. And the wind started howling and it was blowing right into that little area. And I went in, but I started looking at their dock system and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, like all these boats are rocking and rolling. I'd never been there before. And I went and I was like, I'm like bailing, I'm out of this. And I turn around and I turn into the waves, which were now like 2-3 feet or something like that.
Mhm.
And I literally could not make headway. And I was like, oh no, I'm committed. Did another 180 and turned in. But then I realized that, that little hotel's dock is super protected, like way up in there next to the road. And they all helped me get in there. But yeah, there's just sometimes where we can't make our boats just go. You're going to have
Yeah.
to just go with Mother Nature.
Yeah, I've had a lot of moments like that, especially when I was in the Tuamotus where it's all those passes. And there's a lot of current and I only have a 10-horse engine in my boat, so I'm motoring at 2.5 to 3 knots always. And there's often up
Uh,
to 5 knots of current. And at that time I had such a bad leak in my stuffing box and no bilge pump that basically whenever I turned on my engine, it would kind of flood the boat. So I wasn't
oh,
using the engine as much as possible. So I was sailing on and off anchor and sailing in and out of all these passes. But there was always a point when I would go into the pass and I was like, all right, there's standing waves and they're behind me because the current's against me. So I have to make it into this pass. And if I really have to turn on the engine, I will, but then I'm going to spend 20 minutes pumping out the bilge by hand. So, like, this is it. There's no turning around. We're going for it. And yeah, it's definitely
yeah.
a mindset. Like, once you decide you're going, I don't know, then I feel like all fear is erased and it's just go mode.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that's a lot of what sailing I think is really cool for is that it's 100% total commitment. I mean, the minute
Yeah.
you untie from the dock, you're in it. And I mean,
Mhm.
ocean sailing, I think is even more so because once you get far enough out there, nobody can like help you. You're pretty much
Yeah.
totally on your own, and if you're not able to be sort of self-sufficient, then you're in real trouble. But yeah, to go through some of the stuff that you do going into these islands and these atolls. I mean, how many countries have you visited since you left Maine? And that was you left in 2021.
I left Maine in 2018, and then
Oh,
I just sailed.
2018.
Yeah, I sailed down to Oriental and I left my boat in the Whitaker Creek Marina and did one last contract at work because when I left Maine, I just owed everyone in my family money because I was trying to fix up the boat and get it ready. So I worked for like 81 days straight, 12-hour shifts on this ship I worked on, and then left, paid off all my debts, had a couple thousand in my pocket, and sailed from there down to the Caribbean. And that was April of 2019. I left the States officially.
Okay, okay. And then you did the whole you oh yeah, okay, cuz you were trying to get down to Trinidad before the hurricane season that year, right?
Yeah, yeah, I sailed from North Carolina to Puerto Rico in one go because I was just really excited to have an ocean passage and I just wanted to see what it was like. And I didn't have, at that point, I didn't have any satellite communication devices. Now I have a Garmin, but at that point I just left and I was gone and no one knew where I was and I didn't have any weather. And I also didn't realize I was so dumb. Um, I didn't know about windy or predict wind or anything. And my parents are sailors, but they're old school sailors. Like they did it with a sextant, so they didn't know about that stuff. And I was like, how do you check the weather to leave for a passage? I have no idea. So it's sunny, I'm gonna go. And it was 24 hours in. I'm in the Gulf Stream. I left out of Beaufort and it starts to blow 40 to 45 from the
Wow.
east. I'm trying to cross it from the east. I can't go east anymore. My options are to go north at about 8 knots or to heave to and just drift west. And I had 80 miles until I was up on the sandbanks. So I hove to in the Gulf Stream and there's like big breaking waves. And this is my first big ocean passage. So I just had the little storm jib up, nothing else. Hove to for 20 hours probably, and then the next morning I the wind was off a little bit, so I just started sailing and my course. First I was kind of going northeast and then I slowly as I got out of the Gulf Stream curved around. Then I got becalmed. Then I was debating if I should stop in Bermuda or not, but I didn't know what the weather was doing, so I decided not to. And then I got into another storm because I didn't know when the storms were coming. So it took me 2 weeks or 12 days to go 1,000 miles because I was just had such bad weather. But I was so excited about it because I wanted an adventure and I got an adventure, and it was exactly what I was looking, probably minus the storm part, but even that was fun because it was all new and, different.
Well, and it's giving you little tidbits of that experience that,
Yeah,
every sailor slowly builds over time. And even though it can be, really scary. I mean, I've had some very scary moments, more than I can count. And, at the time it's unnerving for sure, but boy, when it's finished, you
yeah,
feel pretty darn good, and you have that artillery in your belt for the next time, and what worked and what didn't and all that sort of
yeah.
stuff. And in some ways, because I had my first trip, which was the solo nonstop, that was successful. And then the second and third and fourth trip have all been technically like failures. I didn't reach the goal that I was trying for. Usually I broke the boat and then had to return after, 3 or 4 months at sea. But I started to question, like, I was like, what am I doing? Like, I keep screwing all this up. Like, I am not succeeding anymore in these things. And then I started realizing, no, actually I'm just building my experience up. And
Yeah,
when I get turned upside down and it rips everything off the boat, I'm able to then do the crisis management and know what worked and what didn't. And so I'm coming out of each one of those bad experiences, with this real positive sort of attitude now, knowing, okay, well, next time if I get dismasted or something like that, then I'll have that experience too. Not that I
yeah.
want to by any means. That
No.
that sounds like an absolute nightmare. But yeah, I don't know. Sailing and I think the real cool thing about sailing is that it doesn't let you, get out of the way or have somebody else deal with it. You have to confront that
Yeah,
stuff. And as a solo sailor, I mean, it's you can't just abandon your boat. You have to deal with it to be able to survive.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think like a big secret that a lot of people don't know about being an experienced sailor is that we've all done some really stupid things and gotten out of it when we were learning. Like I could tell you so many stories of I'll look back on it and I'm like, how have I not lost my boat 12 times already? Like I've done at first I the first time I prevented my Maine, I tied the end of the boom to the lifelines and then had an accidental jibe and it just lifted the cap off of the stanchion. It's like, okay, don't do that. Um, but then, yeah, you make all these mistakes. You get into these situations and you realize that you are capable of fixing and reacting, and it's actually not that hard. And I think it's just about confidence. And you have to go through all that stuff to be a confident ocean sailor, to know that you can handle most of what's thrown at you.
Well, and it just keeps adding more and more and more experience. And then,
Yeah.
I think ideally, and like it has been for literally centuries with sailors, is you just keep compiling it. And as we get older and older and older, there's a point where we then become the old salts that are now sharing our experiences with the next generation, and
Yeah.
and all that. I'm closer to that point than you are. How old are you?
I'm 32. I'm getting there.
Oh my God, you've got decades of sailing left. Oh my gosh, so much fun. But yeah, I mean, I for a long time I kind of worried about what happens when, I hang up my adventurer hat and stuff. But lately I've been doing a lot of like consulting and stuff and hopping on people's
Mhm.
boats and helping them to go and experience, like, going offshore. And like the next trip that I have is a gentleman who has a West Sail that wants to learn how to go offshore and do the trip to Puerto Rico from Florida, but do the offshore route. And so I'll come on board and then we'll just go through it all. And that way it kind of gives him a little safety net. But I essentially can, I don't know, steepen the learning curve and download as much of the information that I've learned over the years
Mhm.
and give it to them. So I, always keep that in mind, Holly. As you're
Yeah.
doing all this sort of stuff, you are literally going to be able to do a master class in, you know, the Pacific Islands, and circumnavigating the world, all that sort of stuff. It's
Mhm.
absolutely amazing. And I mean, what was the question? I just had a really shoot.
Mhm.
I mean, I lost it. I got
We'll
all
come back
caught
to
up.
it.
We'll come back to it. I guess the next jumping off thing for me would be, what was the Panama Canal like? It's always been a dream of mine, but I have yet to go through it. I went the south way when I went around, obviously,
A
and
long way.
yeah, the Cape Horn, all that sort of stuff. But the Panama Canal has just always been this enigma. I know I have to do it at some point, but it just sounds absolutely amazing and like a nightmare, all wrapped up into one.
That's a good summary of it. Yeah, I actually spent, man, it was hard because they now require you to have a minimum motoring speed of 5 knots, which I can't do on my boat. So I spent about a
Oh
month
wow.
emailing everyone I possibly could to find out what would happen if I couldn't make that 5 knots. Because I heard all these nightmare stories about boats getting charged $1,000 for an extra day or like $500 an hour tug tow, and I was like, I can't afford that. I don't have enough money in my bank account. Um, so finally, what they told me was that if I ended up taking another day, all I'd have to pay was the advisor's salary for the extra day, because you need 4 line handlers yourself, and then the canal sends an advisor. He's like your pilot. He doesn't steer the boat, but he's just there on the radio and tells you what to do. So once I established that, I got my canal date, and then you have to have 4 mooring lines that are long. They're like thick, and they have to be long enough to go all the way up to the sides of the canal. And you need
Hmm.
tires as fenders, and people usually rent it. But I was at that point. Now I make my money on Patreon and YouTube, but at that point I was just kind of starting everything, so I was just on such a tight budget, and I couldn't afford to rent any of this stuff. So I was in the like waiting around for so long because I was emailing for so long that I started to make friends, and someone said, okay, I'll loan you the mooring lines, but I only have 3. And I was like, okay, cool, I can work with that. I only have 1 bow cleat, so I can't have 2 lines on the front anyway. So what I was banking on was that the advisor wouldn't go forward because there were so many people in the cockpit. So I took the 1 line and I kind of took the middle of it, and I put it around the cleat and then draped one side along either side of the bow, so it looked like there were 2 mooring lines. And and then I had the 2 aft ones. So when he came on board, I was like, yeah, if you want to go forward, there's like a dinghy and a sunshade, and it's all up there. And he was like, no, I'll stay in the cockpit. So sweet, got away with that one. And then for the the tires I found, because people either buy or rent them, and then they come through the canals and they just dump them. So I went on a walk with a dock cart, and I found just a pile of tires behind an abandoned building. So I grabbed some, and those were my tires for the trip. Um, and found 4 people to join me as my boat line handlers. 2 of them were my friends, and then there were 2 random people. And so there were 6 of us on the boat, and we actually had to take turns. 2 people had to be forward, because if we were all in the cockpit, we would sink the back of the boat so far that the water would come up through the
Oh,
scuppers because it was just too much weight on the boat, and there was barely
yeah.
any room for. I had to sleep outside. Like it was just really fun, funny. Definitely like look back on it and laugh sort of experience, but it was very cool. They let me sail through the Gatun Lake because the wind was behind, and I just had a cool advisor. And he said, like, we weren't motoring fast enough, and he said, "Can you put up the sail?" And I was like, "Can I put up the sail? Because I don't think you're supposed to." And he was down for it.
Oh,
So the
really?
big head sail out and the engine, and we just breezed on through, made it through in time. So it was very cool. Definitely. Don't know if I'd want to do it again, but I'm really glad I did it once.
Well, and so you go through the first set of locks, and then is it? I've heard of people having to anchor for a little while, or even a couple of days in that lake before they can transit the next part. You just did it in all one shot.
Yeah, we spent one night on, they have these huge round moorings that you kind of side tie to, 1 boat
Uh
on
huh.
either side. So we got in the evening after dark, and the tugboat comes, takes the pilot off the boat, and then it was just the 5 of us. So we spent the night there. And then the next morning, the tug brings the next day's advisor in. But at the time, the day before the canal crossing date, my engine wouldn't start. So a friend of mine came on board and we checked it out and we realized that the starting motor was gone. There wasn't enough time to fix it. But I have a hand crank. So we were hand cranking the engine, but I didn't want the
Oh.
advisors to know because I was like, this is already a sketchy boat, you know? I feel
Yeah,
like I
yeah,
don't want to
right.
give them any more ammunition. So we woke up on the mooring and I was making everyone breakfast. And then we saw the tugboat with the pilot was coming in early. So I was like, okay, you guys distract him on the deck. You come down with me. We're going to hand start the engine, but don't let him see. So we're down there with the crank trying to get the engine going. And they're like,
Like, look
hello, yes,
at this.
let's use the boat. What do you think?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, hey, you know what? Whatever it takes to get you
Yeah.
through it, right? That's all that really matters. And then
Yeah.
so from there you get into the Pacific, and how many countries have you visited now between Panama and Australia?
Mm, so there was Polynesia. I spent 2 years there. And then because that was all COVID happened when I was in Panama, and then basically the whole COVID time I was in Polynesia and at sea, slightly in Panama, and then because
Okay.
it was still COVID-y when I left Polynesia, I couldn't stop in every island because some were still closed. So I did Fiji, and then Fiji to New Zealand, and then Vanuatu, Solomons, Australia.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
I
was
tried to go to
I
the
mean,
coast, but I got weathered out.
right, right, right. Well, yeah, I mean, it did. I, I, I think I've mentally blocked 2020 and 2021 sort of out of my head because I tried to do a solo nonstop of the Americas in 2020 and set off from Maine and then essentially got up to the Labrador Sea and then they closed the Northwest Passage. But like the
Whoa.
hurricanes were already rolling, so I was
Yeah.
like, well, what do I do? And I just gunned it east and went as to try and avoid any of the big storms. But then any of the places that I passed, like I passed by the Azores and the Cape Verdes and stuff, and I don't think they were letting people in at that point. And
Yeah.
that was one of the trips where I got closer to sort of losing my mind, I think, than any other, just because I really felt like I was stuck at sea. I
Yeah.
couldn't go back to the States because the hurricanes, I think we had 29 named storms that
So,
season. And I was there in like a August and I was sailing between Africa and the Caribbean in September, watching these storms, slowly build. And I'm just like, oh my God, this isn't a bad situation. But in any event, yeah, so you would have been in the Pacific, all those different islands and trying to negotiate all that. And you only had a Garmin InReach with you as far as communication?
yeah, that was all I had. 40 send and receive and weather texts a month combined. So when I left Panama, it was like I didn't know what was happening with the world, but it was pretty cool because my mom would just text me. She was the only one who texted me. She would give me a little bit of weather and then a little bit of like went for a walk and saw ducks in the pond, and I was like, I don't want to know anything that's happening. I want to just be in my own little world right now. So when I got to the Marquesas, I was just having all these thoughts, like anything could have happened while I was gone. Who knows?
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
kind of a
right.
fun feeling, but probably how people used to feel back in the day. You know, you leave on a sailing trip and you're years away from home and you only get news when, I don't know, when do you get news? You don't. So it was sort of a fun throwback feeling.
Yeah, well, and there were definitely stories of like Gloucester fishermen way back, like 1800s, who were fishing off George's Bank. A big storm comes in, and they disappeared at sea, and then months later they arrive back in Gloucester, having literally made it all the way across to like Portugal, and
Yeah.
but there was just no communication back then. I mean, when I did my first. Or no, my second transatlantic from South Africa to the Caribbean, we didn't have any communication device, no weather or anything like that. And I remember telling my parents, I was like, well, the trip should take between 30 and 40 days. So once we get there, I'll call you, but don't worry
Yeah.
until it gets past those months. And they definitely did. My mom did not like that. She was like, this is ridiculous. But back then, you know, it was sort of,
How it was.
this wasn't it. Yeah, it wasn't that far ago. It was like 20 years, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, all the stuff that we have nowadays is pretty crazy. And I've been pretty much at the same sort of system that you've been on, as far as just using a Garmin InReach
Mhm.
for all of my trips. This last one was the only one where I upgraded to have like an Iridium Go, so I could download the weather easily and conveniently and stuff. So what are you using for weather?
Just the Garmin inReach.
Oh, really? So you just do
Yeah.
the marine weather forecast on there?
Yeah, I have my mom sort of checking the weather because she has full access to whatever, and then she'll condense it into what is like 140 characters, and then give me the
Yeah.
little forecasts. So that's sort of my sneak around for not paying more money for something fancier. But it's hard because I'm just going on what she tells me. It's nice to have that visual too. And when I was trying to decide on my way to Australia, I had this bail point of stopping in the Lewisades, and I didn't want to, but I knew it was there and there was just really snotty weather. And I was trying to decide if I should stop in the Lewisades or keep going to Australia. And texting 140 character texts with someone to get the weather and try to figure out if you can make
Yeah.
that passage, and she could only see a couple, like 4 or 5 days in advance, so it was really tricky. I made the decision with very little information, but better than nothing. But that was one of the times when I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to have better weather? But then I think I'd obsess over the weather more, whereas now there's a little bit of a release because in a way you get what you get. You kind of have an idea of how, like, plus or minus 10 knots what it's going to be. But I think if I could download the weather all the time, I'd be looking at it and trying to change my route. And yeah, it would take me out of the moment a little bit. So that's my excuse.
Oh, that's interesting. Interesting. Well,
Mhm.
I mean, obviously you have a barometer on there, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at least that can tell you kind of if there's a big low pressure system. I mean, that's the most real time information you can get. It's better, I think, than even any sort of modeling a computer can give you. But I definitely see your point on, we're in such a category of boat as far as the speed goes that we're not going to outrun or outmaneuver anything
No,
really.
you
We're going
can't.
to get bowled over. But I definitely like to be able to know what's coming at me. I mean, I always think of I usually download the weather once every like 3 or 4 days, and
Okay, so
that's
you're not obsessing then.
no. Oh, I couldn't afford that. No way. I have like the minimal plan. I just I get as many minutes as I can. And usually when I'm headed out for, 4 or 5 months at a time. And, I have to like pick and choose. So I'll have like 400 minutes. That's all I get. And I can't mess around with it. But, yeah, it's always it's like I'm super excited to get the weather and see what it is, but I'm also nervous because I'm waiting to see that big like purple blob coming at me and be like, oh no,
What do I do?
we
I
we got
guess
a
if you're out for
huge low.
if you're out for such long periods, there's not much you can do. You just have to take what comes your way. You can't turn and
Yes.
get to safety, or yeah, I don't know. There's not many options. You just have to deal with it.
No, oh, for sure, for sure. Well, and depending on where you're sailing in the world, I mean, I've heard from a lot of different sailors that crossing the Pacific, especially once you get into the middle and then you're trying to get to like Australia, New Zealand after that, things get really interesting at that point as far as the volatility of squalls and you get these weird lows and all that sort of stuff. What was your
Mhm.
experience as far as like the first half of the Pacific compared to the second half?
Oh, it was like two different oceans. I mean, the passage to the Marquesas, I took 41 days. It was really light wind, really gentle, rolling seas. I think,
Yeah.
I don't know if it rained once the entire passage. So I had all the hatches open. I'd sleep outside a lot. It was just so chill and wonderful. And then the passage to Fiji, the seas just start to get really steep, and I was getting these funny swirly weather systems where there was one night where I was just completely becalmed. There was so little wind that I could see every star reflected in the ocean around me. It was gorgeous, and I never motor at sea when I'm becalmed. I don't see the point. So I
No.
just kind of sat outside in the cockpit and I was like, oh, this is wonderful. And then the wind came back at 30 knots. And yeah, it just got harder. And then Vanuatu and the Solomons, the waves are so short and steep that they're almost always breaking. And yeah, you do get big, nasty squalls. They'll just suck all the wind away for hours and then push it all back at you once it's done. It's way harder sailing, I think. I'm glad I did it the way I did because the Caribbean, super easy, great for learning. I'd never
Yeah.
anchored a boat on my own before I left, so it was just a great spot to figure out my boat, and then it got progressively harder as I got progressively more comfortable. So I think it's kind of a nice way to go if you don't really know what you're doing. But yeah, now
Yeah.
I'm in Australia behind the Great Barrier Reef, and it's really chill again.
And I mean, well, and so I guess going forward with your game plan, I mean, the Torres Strait I know is known for some pretty stiff winds and all that sort of stuff, but you're going to go explore like Indonesia and all that for quite some time before setting out into the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, I think so. So I actually 2 months ago, my boyfriend moved on board, so I'm no longer a solo sailor. Um, I
Oh
know,
no. Whoa, game
but
changer.
um, so now I'm taking what he wants also into consideration, and he loves the sports like surfing, kiting. So we're thinking of spending a year in Indo just kind of playing. So we're not in a mad rush to get anywhere right now. We're just kind of in chill mode. I want to circumnavigate, but slowly and enjoyably. So if I find a spot I like, I stay there. Like Polynesia was 2 years. Um, but yeah, the Torres Strait, I guess I'll be crossing it in a couple weeks, and I feel like it has a lot of hype. But if you pick the right weather window and you pay attention to the currents and you're careful, I feel like it's fine. I don't know. It's My mom says that every place they went to on their circumnavigation, there was always the famously bad spot that people talked about, and everywhere has that famously bad spot, so you can't take it
Yeah.
like you can't get scared about it. So I'm just being cautious for sure. If into the sailing plan, I've worked about 5 to 7 days of waiting for weather in Thursday Island. Potentially, we might have to. Like, I'm not going to sit out if it's bad weather, but I think if you're careful, it's fine. So that's what I'm deciding anyway.
Nice, nice. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously after the amount of miles that you've sailed and all the experiences you've had, I mean, the Torres Strait's probably not going to be. It's not like you're going through the Straits of Magellan or anything like that. But yeah, it's still. I mean, there is that, and I hate to even mention it, but like, are you sort of worried at all about sort of the pirate factor of going up into Indonesia? And I know Indonesia's not nearly as bad as Malaysia when it comes to piracy, but I could
Mhm.
be totally wrong. My numbers might be from 10 years ago or something. Is that something you're thinking about?
It's not. I think the parts of Indonesia that I'm going to get a lot of cruising boats through, and I think they're like there's no bad stories. I'm sure there's bits like the Philippines I wouldn't go near with my boat because there's a lot of piracy there, and maybe if you get more into northeast Indonesia, you get some of that. But I'm mostly sticking to the southern islands. And I think like a lot of friends of mine are going through Papua New Guinea right now, and well, you chatted with Olivia, having really great experiences. And it's just something that I guess you just can't really think about it. But also now that I'm not on my own anymore, I have like a man to protect me. I feel a little bit more confident of that sort of thing.
Well, I feel like you don't need a man to protect you. You are an absolute ocean beast. You've got the skills. It's awesome. Well, so once you do get into the Indian Ocean, now that's a place that I have desperately wanted to go to, like Christmas Island and
Mm,
what's the other one that Coco and Keeling Island? Cocos and
yeah.
Keeling Island. I think Slocum
Yeah,
stop there, and then obviously some of the others would be really cool, like some of the places
there's
where,
Reunion.
yeah, like
Yeah.
Matissier when he ran aground in his boat and all that sort of stuff. And then, yeah, I mean, would the game plan? And I know it's probably pretty far in the future, but would you try to go up through the Suez, or are you going to try and round Good Hope?
Yeah, definitely plan's always been South Africa, Cape of Good Hope.
Nice.
I
Okay. Very
Yeah,
cool.
for a lot of reasons. One is that, I'm very inspired by my parents because they circumnavigated on their Cal 25 and they did Cape of Good Hope, and
Wow.
I take a lot of my inspiration from what they did. But also I think the Suez just sounds like a nightmare on a small boat. I think if you have a nice big
Yeah.
boat with big engines and you just motor against the headwinds for a month and it's not a big deal, but um I think it's because I was also really inspired by, as so many people are, by Tanya Abbey's book Maiden Voyage, and she talks
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
sailing up through the Suez, and it just sounds so terrible, and I know I'd have to sail it. And she talks about all the headwinds and sleepless nights and bureaucracy, and I just want no part of that.
Yeah. It's like literally the biggest headache. I mean, half the reason that I stay in the middle of all the oceans is because it's so easy, and there's,
Yeah,
it's all international waters, and I can do what I want. I don't have to
yeah.
clear cuts. I don't do anything out there, and yeah, I don't know. I just put up with the loneliness, but I've always been, I don't know. I think possibly I maybe was like a convict in a past
Mhm.
life, and that's why I'm so comfortable with just being out on the ocean for, I mean, the longest stretch was 9 months, and I was pretty much okay, like you though. I definitely, I didn't use my camera, my GoPro, as my friend. It was kind of like my therapist, but also in some ways it was like when I was starting to really come to pieces, I knew if
Mm.
I turned that camera on, I'd like instinctually sort of pull myself together a little bit and be like, "All right,
Oh, interesting.
straighten
Yeah,
up, buddy. Let's
yeah.
do this. You're okay." And it kind of sort of helps a little there. Well, as we're getting closer and closer to an hour, there is, I remembered what I wanted to
Ah.
kind of get into with you, and that is, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, because Mighty Sparrow and myself and our adventures have been like super low budget. We never have all the stuff we want. We don't have the
Mhm.
new things or any of the toys and stuff. One of the things that I run into a lot on the East Coast and stuff is people that want to go out and have these great adventures, but they get stuck with this idea that they need to make their boat a perfect 100%
Mhm.
sea ready. I gotta put that second GPS aerial up. I've got to have the second autopilot ready to go. And
Yeah.
when I look around your boat, because you're sitting there talking in your videos, and I'm looking around at the boat and I'm being like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And it
Mhm.
reminds me of Sparrow, because there's a lot of things
Yeah.
on Sparrow that are not up to snuff. What would you say to somebody who's just sort of keeps putting it off and putting it off, actually going to, like, say, the Bahamas because they want to get the boat to 100%? Do they need that?
Oh, definitely not. And you're never gonna feel ready, because I think part of the reason we think we need all these things is because we ourselves aren't ready. And we think that if we get our boat super ready, that'll make us have this sense of confidence, which you can only get by doing it. And also, there's, I would say 80% of what you find in a West Marine you don't need for your boat. Like you don't need fancy hardware or
Cheers
I
to
just had
that. Yeah.
two snap shackles break on my halyards, and now I just tie them on to the top of the sail with a bowline. And there's it's amazing what you can fix with string and tape. And my only instruments, I have a depth sounder and a knot meter, and that's it. And then I use my phone to navigate with Navionics, and I don't have any other instruments on my boat, and I don't find that I need them. Like I do have a wind thingy, but it never works. Sometimes I use it just to get an idea if I want to go kiting if there's enough wind, but I'd say most of the time it's broken. Like you turn it on, it just spins around in a weird little circle. But I have the little arrow on the top of my mast, and I use that. And yeah, I think it's just a giant consumerist myth that we need all of this stuff. Look at what people did back in the day. They didn't even have navionics, GPS navigation. I mean, that's the coolest thing you can get for your boat, right? Like, I think if I can lie in bed and look at a picture of where my boat is in relation to the land, that's what more do I need than that? You know, everything else is just bonus. So as long as you have a good rig and your boat's not actively sinking and you have an engine that usually works, I think that's all you need. The rest is the adventure when things break. And um, yeah, I think we're just told that we need all this stuff, but you know that you don't. I know that we don't. And that's where all
Yeah.
the fun happens. Less stuff, less to break.
Very well said. Yeah, and I've always found that it just helps to keep me on a tighter budget or be able to still go out without, having, I mean, I've always put the AIS and like the life raft and, flares. Those are in a category all their own. Like I need those on
Mhm.
my boat. I've known other solo sailors that don't sail with a life raft. They're just like, hey, if my boat goes down, I'm going with it no matter what. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, well, hats off to you, but I'm not going to do that. But as far as the actual like electronics and stuff, I mean, I'm still using paper charts. The sextant is only a hobby, really, just to sort of keep
Yeah.
up on it. Um, but yeah, I don't have like you. I've got my Windex, the little arrow on top, but I don't have a wind meter. I don't have a depth sounder. I don't have a log, speedo, any of that stuff. And I have a little GPS plotter that somebody gave me, and I've got my AIS and my VHF, and that's pretty much it. The other nice part is I can power Sparrow with just like one solar panel,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty much good to go. I mean, do you have a refrigerator on there?
No.
Wow, impressive. That's super freaking impressive. Oh, wait, but so you don't eat any bacon and eggs and ham and all that stuff?
Oh, eggs last a month out of the fridge. You just have to turn them every couple days.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I have a really bad habit of getting knocked down so severely that all the eggs get broken. On the last trip, I got turned upside down in the Gulf Stream, and I had 6 dozen eggs, and
Oh,
not a single one of them made it through that one. It was pretty
I like
bad.
that that's the thing that you're like, yeah, I got knocked down. And you know the worst part? I broke all my eggs.
Yeah, there's a clip in a video where I'm like drinking a scotch the next day, and I'm just like, the worst part is all 6 dozen eggs are gone, so the breakfast burrito is dead. And I'm like,
I
cheers.
Eggs are such a staple, though. I am always sad when I run out of them.
I know. Well, did you ever catch wind of that one guy who was, I think he was circumnavigating, or maybe he was just doing the Caribbean, but he had a chicken on board.
Oh, yes, I have heard about him. It's such a great idea.
It totally is. I mean, obviously it'd be a big mess. I've always wanted to have like a little dog or something like that
Mhm.
aboard, but I wouldn't. I think it would be inhumane to go offshore for like 3 or 4 months with an animal. Maybe a chicken would be okay, but I feel like a
I
chicken
feel
would
like
just be so messy and
it would be
dirty.
messy. I think as far as, yeah, like any animal you bring on board, a chicken is probably fine. Their brains are so tiny, it's probably, I don't know, doesn't even know what's happening. And chickens are so
Right,
cuddly. It's
right.
probably a very happy chicken, but yeah, I'd love to have a cat on board, but for me, it's just clearing into all these countries. It's impossible with an animal
Oh, I'm
these days.
sure. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so, yeah, I couldn't even go. Actually, I have friends who are from Australia and they have a cat on board, and I met them in the Solomons, but they can't go back to Australia because of their cat. It would just be thousands of dollars to get it quarantined and vet checked and stuff. So you just limit yourself on where you can go if you bring a pet.
Yeah. Geez. Well, yeah. And hey, most of the Caribbean islands, at least, there's lots of cats and lots of dogs running
Mhm.
around. And if you want one for the time you're down there, you can usually clean them all up because they're all just little vagrant animals. They're everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a little beach dog I adopted in the Tuamotus, and I would just go ashore every day and bring him some food and feed him on the beach and pet him and then leave him there, go back to my boat.
Yeah. There you go. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Well, I am I'll definitely put like links to your YouTube and your
Cool.
Instagram and stuff on in the description, but if you want to take a second and do any sort of plugs or anything like that for my listeners, I'd love to hear. Go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so my YouTube is Wind Hippy Sailing, and my Instagram is Boat Lizard. And then I also have a Patreon account, and that's where I get the majority of my funds for sailing is from Patreon. And that's just patreon.com/windhippy. And then I give little extra videos on there because I do YouTubes every other week. And patrons get snacks or they request videos of things they want to see, like how do I get my dinghy on and off the deck by myself. So it's like I make a little bit more interactive content for people who want to see specific stuff about what I do. And then that's for the past 4 years. That's basically how I've funded this whole trip, is from donations and PayPal and Patreon. So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool community.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. No, for sure. I mean, I've been trying to grow mine and everything, but I think you started everything. At least you have like a 3 or 4 year jump on me.
Yeah.
So, and you're constantly going and going and going. So your content is absolutely amazing. It's very different than the vast majority of sort of the sailing genre, and I really appreciate like the honesty and just, it's authentic and it's you, and you can learn stuff from it. And I think that's where it really becomes a valuable resource. And yeah, I mean, having that sort of masterclass side of the Patreon where you're giving all that information, that's really cool. Very, very good job.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank you.
Cool. Well, Holly, thank you so much for sparing a little bit of your time. I know it's not lost on me how precious time is, especially when you're in a place like Australia. So thank you so much. You and your boyfriend sail safe, have fun,
Thank you.
and yeah, we'll definitely be watching. And
Cool.
if you ever want to catch up again, you got any other updates and stuff, let me know. And
Sounds
let me
good.
say this: if I am not out on the ocean doing a trip by the time you get to going around the Cape of Good Hope, I'll send you my Iridium Go so that you can download weather for that little section, because the Agulhas Current is no joke down there. It's a scary place.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thanks
You're
for having
welcome.
me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. All right.